To those making the long, perilous commitment to catching up to One Piece in hopes of enjoying the epic conclusion with some friends, you may have been around the One Piece fandom on Twitter or Reddit, and you may have heard a fellow that recommended skipping Skypiea or Thriller Bark or some other arc to save you some time. You may have perhaps heard that starting after the time skip is a lot like starting Dragon Ball at Z or Naruto at Shippuden, and in some rare cases you might have even heard someone suggesting to start at Wano to avoid all the bad animation. Maybe you've dabbled in skipping story arcs before. Maybe you skipped to part 7 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and it was fine because it's set in a separate universe from parts 1 through 6. Maybe you skipped the first half of My Hero Academia Season 5 and felt you hadn't missed much because it was mostly just Class 1A training. Well, I'm here to tell you in my One Piece loving, rose-tinted glasses that you should not skip a single arc of One Piece. Everything from Marineford to Gaiman should be experienced in order to fully appreciate the final saga that is broadcasting right now. And if you're tempted to skip episodes because you don't want to miss out on the big finale, I say to you that it is better to enjoy 1,000 episodes and not be there when the One Piece is revealed than it is to rush to the end and be confused. For clarification, I am not condemning when people skip non-canon filler arcs, or skip openings and recaps, or avoid padding and poor pacing with fan edits like One Piece. That is totally fine. I am also not insisting that every arc or chapter is important. It's not like every plot detail is some sort of clue to what the One Piece is, or is relevant to the current story arc. In fact, most of this video will be a deconstruction of the very use of that word in One Piece discourse: importance. You see, when most people insist on skipping an arc like Skypiea or Thriller Bark, they insist it's not important or that nothing happens really. They don't mean this literally. Obviously things happen, and obviously the story of One Piece is important to itself. It defines what's important to the story by being the story. No, what they mean is that the arc is not important for the current conversation, or that nothing happens regarding what's happening right now. Take Long Ring Longland for example. Things happen. Luffy learns about the island, plays a Davy Back fight, and punches this guy in the face. But if you got into One Piece because you wanted to know more about this guy, or want to know about how we got from here to here, then yes, it's not important. But it's not like it exists because Oda needed some more time to figure out his outline of Water 7. It has its very own purpose in the story, and reasons to be read or watched. The Davy Back fight puts Luffy in a position where he's at risk of losing all of his crew, and aside from the risk of death, the idea of Luffy losing a crew member isn't really something that's been on readers' minds since Arlong Park. And we can see that his stance is that it hurt him more than a lot of other things that could happen to him. And while Foxy himself wasn't really a big threat to Luffy, Aokiji's incredible introduction shows us just how unprepared Luffy is for the dangers that the rest of the Grand Line has to offer. The same thing can apply to Skypiea and Thriller Bark, and I'm not even gonna bring up examples like Mont Blanc Noland having met the little people of Greenbit, or Gecko Moria having fought Kaido in Wano. Sometimes the things Oda wants us to see are much smaller than that, like just letting the Straw Hats go on a treasure hunt for once, or having some cute interactions between crew members. One of the biggest moments in the entire series is Blackbeard declaring to Luffy that people's dreams never end, and it was by no typical parameters a scene that was important. It had nothing to do with the plot of Jaya, and didn't lead into anything. Oda could have admitted it, and Blackbeard would still have just chased after Luffy when he found out about his bounty. It's the kind of thing that might seem like a waste of time at first, but can get fans really nostalgic about early One Piece over time. It seems silly to insist that a story arc should be skipped just because it can, when the entire intent of a story arc is to be enjoyed. The reason you're reading or watching the show to begin with, as opposed to just reading the One Piece wiki or some Spark Notes, is because you intend to have a good time. If all that mattered was knowing enough to be in on the current conversation, you could read everything you need to know in a week easily. This leads into my next point. Sometimes people don't insist over skipping an arc because it's unimportant, but because it's boring or even bad. And this is the kind of discourse I've just seen more and more as One Piece YouTubers engage in agenda discourse and hot takes. And maybe I'm not the perfect guy to present a counter argument here, because I personally don't believe there's any bad arcs. If there was an arc that was 40, 60, or dare I say 200 episodes that I wasn't enjoying one bit, maybe I would skip it. But I also feel like if I was in that mindset, I would just drop the series or switch to the manga. It's not so much that people who skip arcs don't deserve the incredible conclusion the series has been getting, but that they wouldn't enjoy it to begin with. Let me explain what I mean. I want to share the story of an online friend that I'm not going to name, but I was chatting with him as he was catching up with the series. Me and many of his friends were into the show, so he wanted to know what the hype was all about. And yes, he would skip arcs. He wouldn't just skip arcs. Anytime the pacing or plot was starting to annoy him, he'd just kinda skim through the episode and skip one or two. If he missed something important, it was sure to be in the recaps for the next 4 or 5 episodes anyway. And he was very skeptical and always criticizing how it's so corny, being about people's dreams and never giving up and friendship. Blinded by our romanticism of the show, we encouraged him on and on. We insisted it gets so much better, and he was catching up much faster than any of us ever did. A couple months go by and he's had enough and drops the show. He said he kept waiting for the show to get exciting and interesting, but after that stupid Whitebeard arc, he couldn't take it anymore and wasn't gonna watch another whole half of the series. It was so heartbreaking. Not because he didn't have the will to catch up, but because he watched nearly 500 episodes of a show he hated. That's so much time wasted on this earth, just for the chance to engage in anime discourse he didn't understand. I really want to emphasize that he called Marineford what many still consider the best arc of the whole series, the stupid Whitebeard arc, because the lesson we really learned encapsulates what I'm trying to get across. We might look at the series and see the undeniable fact that it gets better as it goes on. I mean, how can arcs like Orangetown and Syrup Village compete with the sheer excitement that goes on in stories like Whole Cake Island or Egghead? But unlike how Dragon Ball transformed into Dragon Ball Z, One Piece has been about the same thing the entire time. It's incredibly consistent. The improvements that we interpret as getting better are simply Oda building upon the themes, characters, and world building that all started in East Blue. It's impossible to see Whitebeard claiming the One Piece is real as this incredible moment if Luffy wanting to find it to begin with just seems cheesy to you. Zoro's nothing happens scene would be a joke if him not taking a step back for Mihawk's stab to the chest just made no sense to you. The point I'm getting at here is that you don't need to get to Egghead, Whole Cake Island, Marineford, or even Water 7 to know if One Piece is good. One Piece was already a record-breaking manga in Japan when it was publishing Alabasta, and it was one of Shonen Jump's best sellers as early as Baratier. Nobody in Japan was a fan back then just because of some gut feeling that things will get really good 20 years later. They already liked it for what the show was then. So if you're in, say, the Sabaody arc, and One Piece is still doing nothing for you, it's just not your cup of tea. And that's okay. Not every show is for everyone, even if they're insanely popular. When I was encouraging that guy to keep going even though Enies Lobby was a drag, I should have been telling him to stop when Arlong Park was a drag. That would have saved him a lot of time. Now, am I saying that anyone who doesn't like One Piece immediately isn't a true fan? Of course not. But even if you felt the start wasn't as good, something drove you to catch up, and that wouldn't be possible if nothing about One Piece was doing something for you. There had to have been something in the back of your mind invoking curiosity, or interest, or appeal. And if the start of the show had something appealing, then it only makes sense that the rest of the series will be appealing too. So, if you're catching up right now, I'm imploring you to care as little as you can about catching up in time. I mean, just 5 or 6 episodes a week is more than enough to catch up in a few years. And trust me, I guarantee the anime isn't ending in 2024 or even 2025. There's no need to binge 12 episodes a night every night for 3 months just to brag about how quick you caught up on Reddit. I mean, if that's genuinely how you enjoy shows, go for it. But my point is to make your top priority the enjoyment of the show. My partner's wanted to watch One Piece and I've been helping her catch up. In less than a year, we've already made it to Dressrosa, and maybe it's because this is technically my 4th time enjoying the series, but I feel like it's a real breath of fresh air to just go at our own pace. Sure, we'll watch like 5 or 6 episodes at once, if we want to, but we'll also catch a break and let the information digest. We'll switch to one pace if the arc has been done in dub, but that's not to get the arc over with quickly, but to make the pacing and editing feel more natural and enjoyable. It makes me regret the way I'd watch my first time around. I'd be on my laptop completing Thriller Bark in 3 days. Or I'd watch Dressrosa until I'm so tired that I'm forgetting I'm watching it. Because even though all my friends back then were talking about the latest Whole Cake Island chapter, and that made everything I care about be things that pertain to that conversation, that's not the conversation anymore. And even though Wano was the current conversation for nearly 5 years now, it's slowly fading out of relevance already as Egghead becomes the current arc. But when One Piece is all over, it's not just going to be the final arc or chapter that's the conversation forever. It'll be the whole series. Fans who have finished it everywhere will reflect on all the moments they enjoyed and what defined the show for them. So, for the long term, you should watch the whole series and see what mattered to you. This is a video I wanted to make for a long time, but I'm glad I waited. Originally, my point of view would have been that skipping any arc of any story is just pure idiocy. That it's impossible to fairly judge a story without knowing the full intention of what the author was trying to tell. But I've kind of learned the error of this mindset. I've had multiple failed attempts to watch Dragon Ball from the very start, but I gave in and I started at Z. In other words, I started at the Saiyan arc, and I'm glad to say that I've been really enjoying it so far. I've made it all the way to the Buu saga without any urge to drop the series or take a huge break. But Dragon Ball is the exception here, not the status quo. Dragon Ball began as a funny, somewhat perverted, and low-stakes adventure, a completely different atmosphere from Z. And while I could have learned more about Piccolo, Tien, or the Red Ribbon Army, there wasn't really anything in Dragon Ball Z that had me completely lost. Make no mistake, I found the first half of Dragon Ball enjoyable, and I intend to return to it someday. But my stubborn attempts to grind through hundreds of episodes kept me from enjoying what most people find appealing about the show. And I know that's not the only thing like that out there. Nobody starts Looney Tunes from the very beginning, and it's not like Batman fans have enjoyed or even read every single Batman comic out there. But this is still something I wanted to put out there because One Piece is not among those. And since many people newly introduced to the series are likely going to stick to the live action or the Netflix remake, I wanted people to know that even though Oda has been writing for over 25 years, it really can't be understated how much of his story can and should be appreciated.